work study session. We will go on to the item of business. The PW Litchfield Heritage Center lease. Tells me that Matthew indeed has a presentation.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I do. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Bear with us one second, while I pull our presentation up. While we're doing that, I would like to thank the ladies of the PW Litchfield Heritage Center for being here with us. Thank you guys for being here. They saw the presentation in advance and have been with us on this lease for a long time. And they're here, of course, if you have any questions specifically for them tonight. I would also like to thank former Councilmember Donahue and Councilmember Brandon Watson as well. They spent a lot of time with me over the years working on this document, negotiating, getting it to where it needs to be today, and we're excited to bring you guys this lease. This presentation, of course, is just for information purposes only. There will be a vote if you guys decide to on actual business later tonight. Next slide, please. Mayor and Council, thank you. A lot of this will be review for you, and I would like to thank Randy for these photos. A lot of these pictures I had never seen before, and he included these in his charrette presentation. So those of you that were there tonight may have seen these before. This is a map of the hilltop in the early 20th century. It's hard to see there, but if you look closely, you can see the Litchfield House and you can see the casitas. That space toward the center there is the bandstand area where you have the open lawn there, and toward the back is the tank. As you see, it was a very lush area at the time. For those of you that know the history, originally it was 350 acres, including the orchards. The city got 20 of those 350 acres in 2009. Paul Litchfield passed away in 1959. Edith and Wally Denny lived here until their passing in the early 2000s. And again, we acquired the property in 2009. This is a view looking at the terraces from the northwest. It's hard to recognize that if you didn't know the terraces today, it's hard to recognize this is for what it is. If you look at that staircase going up, there's what we know is the tank today that was underground. That tank is a huge tank that at one time watered this entire site. And again, that shows you what these terraces once looked like. Those trees are long gone. The shelter you see there, I suppose that would be east of the stairs, is gone as well. It was there until just a few years ago. This is a satellite view from 2005. As you see, of course, it was less lush by this time. And you see the terrace. You see the area there in the middle is the bandstand, of course, the Litchfield House and the cottages. Litchfield Denny family. So many of you may remember this. We covered some of these grounds during the library presentations. This was a big part of that. It's important for people to understand the gift language when this land was given. Again, the ceding airport in 2009. Per the 1992 agreement, it's for social, cultural, historical amenity benefiting the community. Acceptable uses might contribute to research, education, or the enhancement or presentation, again, of social or cultural activities in this part of the valley. Potential uses might have included rehab or wellness, medical research care, social service, arts or cultural performance training centers, of course, which started in line with Agua Fria, and religious and or educational centers. Cultural complex. As you know, this site was once the historical center of the West Valley. It's really hard to understate the historical significance of this property. There was so much history here. The Philharmonic Orchestra played here. There were huge services here. It's so much history in this one site. It's still there today. The Heritage Center Agreement, of course, is pending. That's why we're doing this presentation tonight. The library facility has been approved. The Agua Fria Academy has been approved. And the Hilltop Park is currently in design. So this whole project is coming back together to bring it back to the cultural resource it once was between all these different elements. And a big part of this, of course, is the Heritage Center. As I've said, it's difficult to overstate the historical significance of this site. That's the artist's conception of the property when it's restored. We'll see more of those. This is staff's plan for what the hilltop will look like area once restored. Sorry, I didn't realize it was clicking ahead on me. For those of you that haven't seen this, staff that sees this map daily, at the bottom is the Agua Fria site. At the top right is the library. You'll see the new roundabout that's going to be built on Litchfield Road. That line below the roundabout is a proposed underpass to go under Litchfield Road. You'll see the Litchfield Museum there. You see the casitas in front and the event terraces. The bandstand, you see the terraces towards the back. Sun Health is to the southwest. As the current plans call for, a lot of this, what you see now, will be here in August of 2026. It's hard to imagine that today of what it's going to become. The Litchfield Park Historical Society, now known as the Paul W. Litchfield Heritage Center. You'll hear me refer to the Historical Society. I'm trying to get myself used to the acronym. Began raising funds for the restoration of Litchfield House in 2019. The Heritage Center had an agreement with the city in 2018 for them to obtain architect and main plans for the restoration of the Hilltop facility. They've been doing that for some time. Per the Orcutt Winslow plans, the Heritage Center has elected to restore the house into 2 phases. Just like us with Litchfield Square, the prices they had planned for in 2019 changed drastically with COVID, just as air prices for Litchfield Square did. Originally, it was going to be 1 phase, and it's now been divided into 2 phases for that reason. The phase 1 is basically the existing footprint today for the most part. It would include 8 galleries, a temporary entrance to the museum, temporary gift shop, a catering kitchen, temporary workspace and archive in the garage, handicap parking, a terrace on the south side of the building, and landscaping. The red line you see is the proposed leased area that has been surveyed. That is the legal description that is in your lease. The buildings to the right are the casitas. Those will remain owned by the city. Mayor and Council, you may remember recently Farm and Ranch let us know that they will not be participating on the Hilltop project. So we'll come up with other plans to use and restore those casitas. That's okay, but just so you're aware of that. We will be demolishing the small garage there that's north of the house. If you're familiar with it, it needs to be demoed. It has nothing to do really with the house. But of course, the house itself will remain as far as the outline you see today. Phase 2 will be the building of assembly room, an archive storage area, a gallery for changing exhibits, a gift shop, the moving of the entrance from the west side of the building to the east side, and the installation of an elevator for handicap accessibility. Both phases are listed in the lease. I'm just reading this to you so you know what the phases are. As far as the high points of this lease, this is a long lease document, and we've worked on this a long time. We've negotiated with the Historical Society. I'm fairly sure there were 14 different versions of this lease over all the negotiations to get where it is today. And we're happy with the lease, and the Heritage Center recently voted on it last month to approve it as well. So just to hit a few high points of this lease. The term is a 40-year initial term with 4 10-year optional renewals for a maximum of 80 years. So this document will have a long-term effect. Long after probably everyone in this room are gone, this lease will still be in place. Commencement date, that is the date of lease approval. If you guys choose to start to approve tonight, it will begin tonight. Joint use of the facility, the city may use the facility for 1 event per year. No, that's not really realistic till phase 2. There's really nothing we could use. And the Heritage Center could use the bandstand for 3 events per year, obviously once it's restored. Those things could adjust because we don't really know how we would use it, just like they don't really know how they could use the bandstand yet. As we go along, those things will naturally evolve, and we both understand that. It is accepted in as-is condition, so you guys have seen it, know the condition it's in today. The time to complete the phase 1 improvements is 30 months. That's in section 1.6. Obviously, the Heritage Center doesn't really think it'll take that long, but they want to give themselves plenty of flex as they need it. The rent is $10 for a 40-year term. After the initial term, it's $10 per 10-year term. So if they had it for a maximum of 80 years, they would pay $20 an hour. Section 2.1, city agrees to waive the building permit plan review fees for both phases. Section 2.4, Heritage Center agrees the city council member will hold a seat on the Heritage Center Board of Directors. Per council member appointment, that would be Councilmember Allen, once she goes through the training process to be on. Section 2.5, annual operations support. The city agrees to pay the Heritage Center $33,000 a year towards operations. This is once they open. It is contingent upon matching or greater funds from 3 other cities as well. So they would have to have $99,000 there. And I will be meeting in a few weeks with former Councilmember Donahue up there to meet with other city managers, and we look forward to the discussion. Section 2.6 is maintenance. The tenant, of course, is responsible for the maintenance of the lease site, only within the redlined area that you saw on the lease. It's important. Section 7.1 is insurance. City insures the building, but the Heritage Center insures the contents and commercial operations. We had a lot of discussion about this point because it's important to understand the city owns the house. They're leasing the house from the city, but the city will again own the house. Okay. Just to be clear, there's no guarantee that if there was a catastrophic fire tomorrow that it would be rebuilt as it is today. And that's part of the lease. But again, the city will own the building, will insure it, but the Heritage Society would do that, would insure the contents, commercial operations, et cetera. There is a voluntary termination clause in section 15.5. The tenant may terminate the lease with 90 days notice. All improvements would of course remain with the house. Nobody thinks that's gonna happen, but you never know. That was added at Heritage Center request. Improvement, section 18. Like a DA, it's like offsites. The tenant improvements, cost for the installation of all utilities from the house to a 5-foot stub out. Restoration and maintenance of grounds and landscaping, again in leased area, in the redlined area. Restoration to an event center / museum. Phase 1 to be completed in 30 months, no less than 4,000 square feet. Construction of 4 ADA spaces. Construction of a dumpster area, city approval for removal of any trees, et cetera. Obviously, we could do a shared use site there between us and the Heritage Center if that was something that worked for both parties. All improvements are to be approved by the city in advance. That would include an RFP to be done by the Heritage Center for the actual construction renovation. Landlord improvements are in section 6.1 and 18.7. The city will provide utilities to the 5-foot stub outs. That's important. We're going to be installing new utility mains anyway. Obviously, the mains up there are almost 100 years old, at least something to be desired. We're going to be installing all new mains, obviously water, sewer, electrical. And we'll be putting those in, and again, we'll provide them to 5-foot stub outs. They'll pay to connect to the stub outs. The city will provide road access before certificate of occupancy is issued. Obviously, we can't have a CO if they can't access the building. And this goes right along with the Agua Fria timeline. Per the Agua Fria timeline, again, these things such as the library, the roundabout, the driveway, all these things will be done by August of 26. Short timeline. And again, the Heritage Center ladies are here with us tonight. If you have any questions for them, or of course you have any questions for me, again, this is not the time for a vote. This is just presentation and information. If you have any questions, we certainly welcome them, or questions for the Heritage Center. Couple other things. Again, the city will require an RFP for restoration and renovation. I've already covered this, but again, it is addressed. One concern I did hear from a couple of you, consideration of conditional approval of lease to require restoration of outside building, including paint, windows, roof, terrace, and the lease area by July 1, 2026. The lease allows 30 months for restoration. Obviously, we want the outside to look beautiful again by the time Agua Fria opens. It can't look like it does today. That's nothing on Heritage Center. That's on us, but just be very clear about that. But again, so if they're working inside the house after July 1, that's fine. But again, the outside of it, the terrace around it, the windows, the paint, the roof, it needs to look nice from the outside. So it goes along with Agua Fria, if that makes sense. Okay. If that's a concern that council has, we could certainly do an addendum to the lease. You could do a motion that we approve the lease with the addendum as written, if that's something council's concerned. And again, thank you again for the Heritage Center ladies, and for former Councilmember Donahue and Councilmember Brendan Watson for all their work on this. Questions?
Questions, council? Councilman Frazier?
Yes, sir.
Parcel B, which I believe is the garage, is that where the ADA spaces are supposed to go? Because that's part of their lease agreement.
No, sir, it's not. That was old, because we weren't planning on, let me go back here. Sorry, sir. Let me see my answer. See that horseshoe?
Yep.
That's where the ADA spaces would be, sir. Some of that horseshoe is where the garage is today, are pretty close to it. So that's where the horseshoe spaces, or where the ADA spaces would be. Part of the complication of those ADAs is you also have to have a fire truck turn around. That's why it looks like a horseshoe. So you can have the fire truck come through, and also so they can have buses come through. That's something the Heritage Center wanted, to have bus drop off available. And I would like to say that was our city planner's idea to come up with that, what I'm calling horseshoe. I think it works very personally.
Was the parcel 2 then excluded somewhere in the language of the document because it's in the legal description?
That I don't.
No, we can remove it from the legal description.
We certainly
It
could.
should be
That's right.
removed.
We can certainly do that. Other questions?
Can I see the three issues you had at the end of the presentation?
Yes, sir, you sure can. That one, sir.
Oh, so there's two, all right. Okay, I thought there was only two, but I saw three and I
The third
wasn't
one's
sure
just
what the third one was. All right. Any other questions, Councilman Clare?
The termination agreement that you had, that's 90-day termination, is there a cause? Is it just at will?
It's at will, sir. But again, all improvements done would stay with the house.
Mr. Vice Mayor?
City Attorney. I've been general counsel for the Historical Society since they formed. I've never been paid a nickel. It's all been volunteer work. And I'm not representing them on this project. I required them to get outside counsel to assist them. Do I have a conflict in voting on this?
Legal counsel do?
That's,
I don't think so, because the conflict requirements or provisions provide for, it's gonna be a monetary, benefit. And if you were serving as an unpaid volunteer, it would just be like if you were on a board, serving as on an unpaid position on a board for an organization, and wouldn't have a conflict in that case either.
okay, great, thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments from council?
Last question, is there any cost escalation, CPI adjustments to any of the terms in here? So, for example, the city of Litchfield agrees to pay $33,000 annually with the participation of Avondale and Tolleson. Are we escalating that over the 4-year term?
No, sir, we didn't plan for that. If that was something we would look at in the future, but certainly both parties could get together and negotiate that if that's something they wanted to do.
And no escalation on the rent payment either.
Right.
We're not getting $11.
No.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation. We will take this up in the business meeting.
Thank you, ladies, for being here with us. You're welcome to stay for the item later on the agenda if you would like.
Takes us to item B on the work study business items, Litchfield Square parking garages.
Mayor, Council, good evening. Randy Prosser, Planning Director. This is the first of 5 presentations you'll see me up here tonight for. This first one is going to be the most fun. It is parking. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. We are-
Highlight on this night.
We are more so than text amendments, I gotta tell you. This is the very start of our presentation and our conversation about what's yet to come. For Councilmember James, Councilmembers Brandon Watson, I'll be describing some of these slides. I know Councilmember James was driving, so I'll provide the narration. So we've hired Walker Consultants to do a site analysis, alternatives analysis, and conceptual design. This is not D&E, as we often say. This is not design. This is not engineering. This is not construction. This is kicking tires. You could say this is a first blush at what we're trying to come for. Certainly, it's in your purview and your discretion. Should we move forward with any of these ideas towards the inevitability of design engineering or actually building? As far as critical mass, why are we talking to you tonight? Why is this a deal now? Right now, there's around 200 spaces. There's around within Litchfield Square, there's around 150 spaces on Old Litchfield Road on Wigwam Boulevard. I counted 1,479 cars at our last festival. I don't recommend you using drone photography to count cars individually, but this is something we need to be very cognizant of as we fill in the square, and as these lots are under construction, those cars don't have anywhere to go. And as of this last festival, about 400 of those cars were in the neighboring streets outside what you consider the square. So we are deficient by design. All of our lots aren't going to be required to have the full extent of parking required by code. If that was the case, all of these lots that we've created with this red carpet we've rolled out would just be parking lots. And that is not anything that we are desiring. So through our ability in the tech development agreements, we are addressing each of these as they come in through each RFP, somewhat uniquely as we've continued to evolve these situations. And that's an image from our fall festival last year, just as far as how many cars there are around. So pondering parking plan possibilities, this is where we're at. What you see in before you today on lots 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 13 and 14 are what we hope to see in the next 12 months as far as construction, which means those lots are essentially out of play for any sort of overflow parking. Our desire and our goal is to certainly keep these cars in the square, not in neighboring streets, not in anyone's neighborhoods, not in front of anyone's garage. But again, we're trying to balance as far as how do we add more parking, but not take away what we're trying to accomplish as far as these mixed use developments. So the one we know for sure, we can say with certainty before you tonight, is the Scout Garage, what we're calling Scout Garage. This is where Scout Lodge is today. It's on the south side of Fairway. We feel very confident in the fact that this is the most ideal location, somewhat within the square, but not taking away any of the developable lots. This is right behind lots 3 and 4. So one of the things we did talk to you about a little while ago is you got a couple of options as far as how you divvy up that garage. Every garage is around the same size. There's a sweet spot for how you do ramps, how you do, the parking stalls as they are. And generally, parking garages are 9 by 18 as far as the stall width and depth. And that results in a yield of 317 parking spaces. That gives you a 26-foot drive aisle. The reason we do an 18-foot stripe instead of a 20-foot stripe is it causes people to pull in a little bit closer to the walls, gets them a little bit further in. They're afraid they're spilling out into that drive aisle. So by doing that, you keep that drive aisle a little bit wider. Now, certainly if everyone has their trucks are going to affect that. So we've started this conversation with you a while ago as far as we can go 10 by 20, but you do have a loss as far as how much you end up having in the garage. In this case for Scout Lodge, it goes from 317 to 282. Now, the other thing that does is when this stripe is longer, people tend to just be a little bit more relaxed as far as parking. So they give a little bit more room in front of the front bumper. Now, it is of the opinion of Walker Consultants, the people we've hired. They do parking garages all day, every day. If you've been to the Heritage District in Gilbert, both of those garages came from these folks. They've done garages all throughout Arizona and quite frankly, nationwide. So it's of their opinion to stick with the 9 by 18, just because, with a lower yield, you're paying more per stall in that case. It lowers the driver experience. What they mean by that is when you don't have everyone tucking in as much as possible, you feel a little bit more tight. You have that classic parking garage feel as far as, I hope I'm turning my vehicle correctly. And they estimated it was about a 20% increase in cost per stall. Now, this is a work study session, so at any point, if you want to ask questions, feel free to interrupt me. Now, second steps. We think the location on Scout, yes, go ahead.
This goes back to your first comment where you said 400 cars were parked outside of the square. Can you describe where outside of the square those cars were parked, just for when you say inside the square versus outside the square?
Thank you.
Can you differentiate what that means and
Yes.
explain where the cars were parked?
Councilmember Allen, I'll pull up the map here. So those cars were generally on the community known as La Casa Linda, which would be south of Wigwam. These are the condos and the townhome units. They're off this image. I apologize. They'd be south of Wigwam Boulevard, essentially everywhere outside of our room here. So all the neighbors you can think of just outside these walls to the west, all of those local streets were, let's say, convoluted with cars.
So there were 400 cars on those streets.
I'd say I may have miscounted 1 or 2, but a majority of those were there. Some actually went up to Fairway and were lining Fairway as well. Now we do have a park up there, but it's not our intent to proliferate cars, again, outside the bounds of what you consider south of Fairway, north of Wigwam, east of Litchfield, and west of Old Litchfield.
Thank you for that clarification.
You're welcome.
Mr. Vice Mayor.
The 1479 cars, that over the entire weekend or just at one point in time?
That was at one point in time, Vice Mayor.
I drove it during a very busy time to look and see myself. And There was no parking spots. It was massively
Mhm.
packed.
which is exciting. Now, second steps. And this is, I hope the bulk of our conversation this evening, again, this is first of 5 presentations to you, so I'm going to be brief as much as I can. These are the things that before our consultant wraps up this sort of initial look at this, we really want to start honing in. We don't want to have 4 options on the table. We would like to have what is going to be considered the second garage determined through our conversations this evening. So let's see if my little, no, maybe I'll skip that idea. There are 4 options. Let's call it west, southwest, and then there's 2 directly to the east. These all essentially wrap the park. 2 of them are on Litchfield Road. 1 is on Old Litchfield Road. Now, you'll note that all of them have a little area highlighted in blue. Our consultant feels as though it behooves us, quite frankly, to have retail storefronts that hide these parking garages and gives opportunity for more leasable space. And I've got an example imagery I can show you on the next slide. As far as the west option 1, again, just to describe the area, Village Parkway is on the north, La Loma is directly to the east. This is mostly contained within parcel 9. You'll see that these all pretty much are the same size. Again, there's a sweet spot as far as how this all works. This is an isometric of how that would work. A couple things to note with this. One is that retail storefront would take up what you consider the first and the second story. The top of the second story, there'd be cars. There'd be screen walls, of course, so you wouldn't notice that there's cars, but if you looked up, you may see a parking lot light, hanging out. So now, again, here on option 1, it's a yield of 375 or 340 stalls. That difference again is either if you go 9 by 18 or 10 by 20. If you go to 3 stories, now this is something we're considering because there are height limitations when you're on Fairway or when you're on Wigwam, but these locations that are more central within the square certainly have that allowance to go up to the 3-story, 54-foot height. These are not 54 feet tall, but they are considered a 3-story option. Now that yield jumps up to 530 stalls at the more narrow stall dimensions or down to 480. And that retail square footage is about 18,000 square feet, which we think is fairly good considering you get that sort of opportunity and you hide the cars behind it. Now, there were a couple of options our consultant looked at as far as if you reduce that retail square footage, if you dropped it down 3,000 square feet down to 15,000 square feet, there's only about a 1% gain in number of parking stalls. If you drop that down to only 5,300 instead of the entire block length, if it was almost a square shape, at one of the corners, you get about a 12% gain in number of stalls. If this is of importance, we can certainly advise them accordingly to say that, more cars fronting would be preferred or more retail to block all those cars, either way. Option 2 is go big or go home, I think is how you describe it. Option 2 straddles Honeysuckle on both sides and would yield every parking space you could ever need. But what that would create is that would mean that every other developable lot, and that includes the remainder of 11 and 12 that aren't shown within that footprint, and the remainder of 10 that's not shown in that footprint. If I haven't mentioned, outside of these garage boundaries, we would anticipate to be buildings, no additional surface parking. These would take care of it. Option 2, and you'll have to stick with me on this for a bit. This is a more unique design, I guess you could say. This is something that the consultants do frequently, but you have a little bit of a loss as far as the feeling, because any space you park on the first and second level, you're parking askew. You're gonna drop your water bottle and it's gonna roll down that ramp because there isn't any flat areas along that backside. Once more, the retail fronts the park, the front City Hall to the east, and there are some areas that you could certainly have that sort of standard of experience as far as parking on flat ground. Now, at 2 stories, it's a yield of 780 or 705 stalls. At 3 stories, you're looking at 1,140 stalls or 1030. The retail space as shown is 33,000 square feet. Again, that's the same option one we looked at with 18,000 on the north and 15,000 there on the south. Now, if we just dropped that image on the right, that 15,000 square foot of retail and had additional parking stalls, it'd only be about a 7% gain. I'll pause there for any questions on these two options.
Vice Mayor.
Am I correct in thinking that the third story does not add that much to the overall cost? I mean, there's some cost savings there. Because we've already got the footings, foundations, everything else, the dirt.
Yes, Vice Mayor, there is a bit of cost savings. There's an option coming up that has the most cost savings. The more you can put on the ground floor is certainly the biggest bang for your buck. But yes, as you go up, there is a lower cost per level.
stall.
Yes, that's correct.
And my second question is, we've contemplated the city building the parking garages. You have incorporated retail into the parking garage structure, but we're not in the business of building or owning retail. How do you anticipate coordinating that together?
Vice Mayor, I would use my city attorney to the best of his ability to understand the complexities of that. Our consultant has provided some initial feedback on that note. Certainly, there is a bit of questioning as far as how we would factor into our own CFD if we retain ownership of the garages as well. Again, this goes back to Scout Lodge is the simplest, easiest way to go about it without affecting any of the developable lots. I'll move forward. Two options in the east, just for bearing's sake. Honeysuckle is the road you see on the south. Village Parkway is on the north, and then Desert Avenue is on the west or the left. What is just off screen is Old Litchfield Road to the right. So this is somewhat sandwiched between the Tierra Verde Village Center and the Church at Litchfield Park to the north, our park to the west, and the Oleander Wall, let's call it part of the Wigwam Resort to the right or to the east. This is the same as the previous version you saw in what's called the west option one. It just flipped. Again, putting the retail against the park and still leaving room along Old Litchfield Road. You can see there in parcel 5 for additional retail. So really hiding the parking to the best of our ability. The other thing I hadn't mentioned yet, but you'll notice on these slides, let's call it the ground floor at the bottom of that blue box is at grade. When you do have a ramp going up, however, you have the opportunity to go down. So these also show, let's call it a half level of subterranean available as far as that half ramp that goes below grade. Again, same numbers you saw previously for the west option at 375 or 340 stalls. At 3 stories, 530 or 480 stalls, same size in that 18,000 square foot of retail space. And again, same sort of option as far as if you didn't want the entirety of that frontage against the park to be retail, we can reduce that down to just a more of a square shape. East option 2, and Vice Mayor, to your question earlier, of all the options presented to you, there are 4, and this is the 4th. This is the one that costs the least per stall because it has the biggest ground floor footprint of the 4 options. What this would look like, and this is just the 3-story isometric instead of the 2-story isometric. This shows a central ramp instead of a ramp at one end. They have options. They're experts at this sort of schematic design. This one at 420 stalls, 370 with the nicer parking stalls, let's call it 570 or 500 at the 3-story option. This one does have retail in the corner. I'll go back to it as far as that option goes. This was the most garage-centric option, let's call it. But we did want to look at if it made sense to have a little bit of synergy between the Tierra Verde Village Center to the south, Papa Paul's right there at the corner, and still have an extension of retail here at the north end instead of just 100% garage. And then if that little corner of retail was removed, it's only about a 5% gain on those numbers you see in front of you.
Mr. Vice Mayor.
Back up. 7, is that a building?
So anywhere that you don't see the gray boxes in all these options would be 100% retail, restaurant, 3-story, no need for any additional surface parking.
Is the building attached to the garage?
So you can attach it to the garage. However, once you do, the fire department really doesn't like it. The best option is always to maintain a 10-foot separation. These were also designed in favor of a 10-foot separation, and knowing that there is a sweet spot for retail store frontages as far as it's about 64 to 70 feet deep is the standard and typical you'd see.
Just a question, we had allotted for so much square footage in the CFD to be able to have the square footage help pay for itself. This is obviously eating into that. It puts a bigger burden on the CFD, correct?
Yes, sir, it does.
CFD may have to go for a longer period of time, but you know, the concept of 400,000 square feet down there is really not very appealing. Something closer to 240,000 is probably a lot more realistic.
How many?
240 plus or minus. The
That's
first,
retail
the
or
first
is that
three.
Food condos. What's that? Two condos or is that just?
Oh, that's building, so it include condos.
Mr. Mayor, do you mind if I comment on that, sir?
No, go right ahead.
Councilmember Claire's question is a good one on ground space versus parking space. As our city planner has said, you certainly save money by building more parking spaces on the ground floor, but you're doing that in exchange for retail. We ran these numbers a couple months ago, and if you do that, again, it's cheaper because you're building parking space on ground instead of retail, but it's only cheap for about the first 5 years. We looked at the numbers at the potential retail sales tax you would be losing by doing a parking space instead. And after year 5, you're losing money because you're not bringing in that retail sales tax instead of a parking space in its place, if that makes sense. So the ground level spaces, again, make sense financially until about year 5, year 6. But about after that, you're losing money by not having the retail sales tax dollars, especially as the years go on. When that 5 becomes 10, 20, 30 years, it really snowballs. So that's one thing. And also to the mayor's point, originally when Woody was working on this, we planned for 400,000 square feet. You may never see that. Say you get 250, say you get 300. Obviously, that very much affects your CFD. It also affects your sales tax, how much money it brings in, right? But another thing to remember, it's nice to think that retail on the 2nd or 3rd floor is realistic. I would tell you for the most part, it's not. You see that in a few places, but for the most part, retail on the 2nd or 3rd floor doesn't exist. You're much more likely to get condos on the 2nd or 3rd floor, lawyer's office, maybe a dentist office, but just not much retail. Most of your retail is on the 1st floor. So I just want you to be aware of the trade-off there. Again, it's cheaper parking, but it stops paying for itself at some point. Sir.
So as far as where we are, our consultant has been on a bit of a pause, you'd say, waiting for this conversation to occur. His desire and our desire is not to keep pressing forward with 5 different alternatives as far as where garages should go. Once more, staff feels as though the Scout Lodge is a for sure as far as what makes the most sense, and really is my hope for us this evening that one of these 4 options sticks out as the most likely scenario for a second garage in the future. Now, again, we don't plan to do this tomorrow. We don't plan to do this next year. But as we find success and find more success, we don't want to turn away future success. So we want to make sure that we're planning ahead to make sure that we are accommodating a garage need in the future as well.
Mr. Vice Mayor.
How tall is the parking garage on the other side of Route 1, or Old Litchfield Road?
Not sure what.
Which,
Dog park garage. That's a concrete multi-story parking garage. They have the dog parks.
You're talking about
No.
the car barn?
Yeah,
It's not, I don't know. It's 2 levels, but it's only,
yeah, is it 2 levels?
I think so, yeah.
not higher than.
Nobody even knows it's a multi-story parking garage, the way it's sitting in there.
Because of the landscaping and it's away from the street.
And just to stick on that topic real quick, I'm gonna go back to our very first slide. And if forgot to mention, that's a parking garage. That is a parking garage this consultant has worked on previously. You can barely see it, but at the top of that image, you can see one of those street light or the parking lot lights just sticking up there. So what you're looking at is the stairwell and the elevator shafts, and it's 3 stories.
People, for the most part, don't think of the parking lot that's on Old Litchfield Road as a parking lot. We drive by it every day. You know, from the houses and from the park, it doesn't. It's all again.
We're on parking lot,
It's all,
and it's massively, undersized.
it is.
So this is thinking how far out for the second, if we assume that Scout Lodge is priority 1.
Mhm.
Or the Scout Park, is that where?
Either way,
Yeah, so if we assume that's 1, that's gonna fill the initial term as Raboy. How soon do we anticipate the need for the second garage?
You know, the problem is that it is, we need to see what parking looks like after we get these first 3 buildings built. Because all of those 3 buildings are using ground level parking basically. And the lots that are left are all prime spots where we put in maybe 1 additional parking garage. That's what they're looked at here, with different options. We have to be careful though, as we go forward, when we try to sell those lots. We know from the conversations we had with all 3 developers, they don't even like the idea of somebody building a parking garage right next to their building. I mean, it's very difficult. So we need to be in a situation where the property itself is valuable enough that we can get a developer who's willing to be flexible about parking garage issues. So that we actually fill, you know, at least 2 of those probably need to be filled lot line to lot line with parking built into the building. And so it's gonna have to be it's gonna be a situation where we're gonna have to negotiate with people as we get people interested on how are we gonna incorporate a parking garage in this building with it being building to the lot lines.
Odd question.
We have had 1 person interested in that concept for lot 6, 5, 6, 7 that would use a significant portion of the bottom floor as parking. And then maybe some additional use on the second floor, but the rest of it being condos. So there is some interest, but it's, you know, it's not nearly as easy because people just don't think they don't do that. And then there's an expense involved in it, obviously.
This is an odd question, but the 1 space that's nearby, that's close, that is designated parking right now is the golf course parking lot. Any interest in reaching out to the Wigwam and seeing if there could be a build out there? They could certainly use the additional parking as well.
The trouble is they need to put a parking garage probably there. If we would let them put one there, they would need to put one there just for their own use, not for any of our uses. They really can't do any additional development of any significance on the Wigwam without dealing with parking issues. Mr. Vice Mayor.
Can you go back to the overall area slide?
yes, I can.
Yeah, the one that includes, it shows the other garage also, first garage. Scout garage, there we go.
This one, I did not show the garage. I was just showing
Yeah.
what tomorrow looks like instead of.
Is that, I mean, there's a lot of dirt there, that cart path and everything, between 1 and 2's parking lots, 3 and 4's parking lot, there's a lot of dirt in there. Does it make sense to look at putting what you call the Scout garage first, and then being able to add to that? To put in the second phase and have it all sitting right there on that pretty much useless dirt?
Vice Mayor, the thing we're very cognizant of, there's a few things. In blue is the rerouted airline canal that we've undergrounded, and we are, I mean, just fitting this garage within that designated space. as far as adding to it, we were also very cognizant of our height limitations along Fairway Drive, being that two-story max. So the absolute max we could put in this garage is that 317 parking space number.
What about surface parking?
We could extend it further to the west. And just we have to change the traffic flow a little bit, and we have to move the airline canal again, right? Which is done, can be done. I mean, we've already done it once, not a big deal. So it is possible to use that space, but
Can you get enough out of it for what we need? And is it close enough to everything else that it works?
Vice Mayor, it's not something we had considered. It makes a lot of sense to me. I can certainly take that back to our consultant to study.
There's a lot of dirt there. I mean, a lot of excess dirt.
I mean, you've got, there's a lot, there's only some that you can really use, because you've got to maintain the, entrance to the, the underpass, and that's got to be slope, so it's going to use quite a bit of that gravel and stuff. But we can certainly gain some space. I think the most important thing to take away from this is that we're gonna need to develop a consensus on, from council, that the Scout Garage, we're gonna use the Scout Garage. We're gonna make it look like a building so that it fits in, and we're gonna hide it as much as we can with oleanders and other kinds of landscaping, so that it serves as a buffer between the residences and the development, the actual development. We need to have that certainty, because then that drives all the rest of the planning. So the rest of it's gonna be done to be, TBD. Councilor Frazier.
Go back to the overall site plan, or at least the option one. So this one, I also spent a lot of time on parking in a former life. I'm not crazy about the east option. I would prefer to not pull 500 cars into the center of Litchfield. I prefer to keep them on the exterior. I recognize that lots 11 and 12 are a hard corner and potentially valuable lot space. However, from a resident standpoint, I would prefer the entrance to the garage off of Litchfield Road and use lots 11 and 12 as the whole garage. Keeping the rest of the space open for retail, commercial, residential. It's gonna get busy. It will be busy. We are building something that people are gonna wanna come to. I recognize that. I would prefer, and I think a lot of people would, to keep as much traffic off of our 2-lane downtown roads as possible.
Thank you.
I think, you can build something, and I don't think we're gonna, excuse me, I don't think we can think only of 11 and 12, but we need to think of 9, 10, 11, and 12, the whole unit, all 4 of those lots, so that you end up with parking and retail space on those lots in a way that maximizes their value.
So far we'll explore the Scout Garage enlargement option, and we'll look further at 11 and 12. I'd be happy to take any.
I would be inclined to agree with the vice mayor. I am not a huge fan of putting parking garages everywhere. I think that can cause problems later on down the road, especially with, what if Waymo comes? What, we've got Uber, we have all of these different things, and do we really want to be bringing all these cars into our downtown area? So I think to be efficient with the space that we have at Scout Lodge would be a great start. And if it truly is 400 cars that we're spilling out into the neighborhood for our festival, I think that is something that would easily absorb that.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, unless there's,
We had 400 cars spilling out, so we're using the dirt pads also. The buildings are gonna go.
There is still parking within Litchfield Square that we've built in.
Yeah.
So all of that parking is going to be available during festivals.
it's gonna be a balancing act. But I think staff has gotten direction from council, so they can continue working on trying to come up with a plan.
Yes, sir.
Is there anything else that we need to cover in this work study?
No, sir.
Any, excuse me, anything that the council wants to talk about on work study before we go into the regular? All right, is there a motion to adjourn the work study? Your second?
I'll second.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, work study is ended.